The 1970s shattered every rule of modern parenting, and somehow it raised the most psychologically resilient generation we have ever seen. Here is what nobody wants to admit. We have been told that children need structure, supervision, protection from failure. But the kids who grew up in the 1970s had none of that. They were sent outside after breakfast and told one thing: be home before dark. No GPS, no check-ins, no adults hovering. And what happened to their brains because of this is something neuroscientists are only now beginning to decode. But here is where this gets complicated. That same freedom that built their resilience also left invisible scars that show up decades later. In this video, we are going to uncover 7 psychological traits that define this generation, the hidden price they paid that nobody talks about, and why understanding both might change how you see your own parents or yourself forever. Let us start with what made them different from every generation that came after: the freedom to fail without anyone catching them. Picture this: you are 7 years old. Summer morning, your mum hands you a peanut butter sandwich and says 3 words: go play outside. That is it. No schedule, no supervision, no plan. Just you, the neighborhood, and 8 hours of complete autonomy. You would disappear into the woods and build forts out of branches. You would invent games with rules that changed every 5 minutes. When someone got hurt, you figured it out. When someone cried, you handled it. When 2 kids got into a fight, there was no adult rushing in to mediate. You learned to solve your own problems because there was literally no other option. And here is what neuroscience has discovered. This kind of unstructured play does something remarkable to developing brains. It builds what researchers call executive function, which is the ability to plan, adapt, and make decisions without external guidance. Every single day, these kids were training their prefrontal cortex in ways that structured activities never could. But that is not even the most important part. The second trait goes deeper, and it explains why people from this generation can read a room faster than anyone else. I call it survival intelligence. Imagine riding your bike through the neighborhood. You pass the Miller house and notice their car is home at 2 in the afternoon. That is unusual. You file it away, you know which yards you can cut through and which ones will get you yelled at. You can tell from 50 feet away whether the older kids are in a mood to include you or whether you should disappear. This was not anxiety. This was pattern recognition refined through daily practice. When you navigate the world without adults interpreting everything for you, something shifts. You develop a 6th sense for reading people, for sensing tension before it explodes, for knowing when to push forward and when to vanish. Modern children whose parents narrate every social situation never develop this radar. But 1970s kids, they can walk into a room and know within seconds who the real decision maker is, who is pretending to be fine but is not, and who should be avoided entirely. Researchers call this hypervigilant social awareness. For these kids, it was just called paying attention. And this leads directly to the third trait, one that terrified parents of later generations, but created something unexpectedly powerful. The latchkey phenomenon. 3:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. The school bus drops you off. You walk to the front door and fish the key from under the flower pot. You step inside to silence. No one is home, just you, the hum of the refrigerator, and the next 3 hours. You make yourself a snack, turn on the television, start your homework. Maybe call a friend on the landline, stretching the cord into your room for privacy. This was not an occasional thing. This was every single day. Now here is what those quiet afternoons actually created, and this is crucial. Every day, you proved to yourself that you could handle being alone, that you were competent, that you did not need someone constantly monitoring you to survive. Psychologists call this an internal locus of control. the deep belief that your actions directly shape your outcomes. For 1970s kids, this was not a theory. This was lived experience, reinforced 5 days a week, year after year. When something broke, you fixed it or figured out how to explain it. When something scared you, you dealt with it. When something went wrong, you did not wait for rescue. You became your own rescue. This self-reliance is so deeply wired into this generation that it shows up in everything they do decades later. How they handle crises, how they solve problems, how they react when life falls apart. But here is the thing most people miss. This same wiring that made them resilient also made something else happen. Something that would not show up until much later. We will get to that. First, you need to understand the fourth trait, because this one might be the most counterintuitive of all. The superpower of boredom. Remember those afternoons when you had finished your homework, watched your 1 hour of allowed television, and still had 3 hours until dinner? You would wander into the living room and say the 2 words every parent dreaded, "I am bored." And your mother would say, "Go find something to do." That was it. No phone to scroll, no tablet to grab, no parent rushing to entertain you. Just you and that restless, uncomfortable, almost itchy feeling of having nothing to do. So you would wander outside and stare at clouds, reorganize your baseball cards for the 4th time, call your friend and discover they were bored too. So you would be bored together until eventually, inevitably, one of you invented something. Here is what modern parents completely miss. Boredom is not a problem to be solved. It is a signal that the brain is ready to create. And 1970s kids learned to sit with that discomfort until something emerged from the other side. This tolerance for understimulation extends far beyond childhood. These are adults who can sit in silence without reaching for their phones, who can wait in uncertainty without demanding immediate answers, who can tolerate ambiguity that makes other generations physically uncomfortable. And the research backs this up. People who experience regular boredom as children develop more active brain regions for creativity and self-reflection. Their brains learn to generate ideas from nothing because nothing was exactly what they were given. Type the number 7 in the comments if you remember those long, empty summer afternoons when boredom eventually turned into the best adventures of your childhood. I want to know if this resonates. Now, we get to the trait that left scars, and I mean that literally. The calibrated sense of risk. Think about the big oak tree at the end of your street, branches thick enough to climb, high enough that the ground looked small from the top. You climbed it anyway, you rode your bike without a helmet, hands off the handlebars, flying down hills because that was what made you cool. You jumped off bridges into water you had no business swimming in. You built ramps out of plywood and bricks that were absolutely not structurally sound. And yes, sometimes you got hurt. Knees scraped to the bone, twisted ankles, maybe a broken arm. You have the scars to prove it. But here is what happened in the process, and this is important. You learned through direct experience what was actually dangerous versus what just looked scary. You developed an internal calibration system for risk that no amount of warning labels could ever provide. That tree taught you exactly how high you could go before the branches got too thin. That bike jump showed you the precise difference between thrilling and hospital bound. This was not recklessness, this was wisdom purchased with pain. While other generations freeze in uncertain situations, paralyzed by what-ifs, 1970s kids learned to assess and move. They understand in their bones that some risks are worth taking because they survived the consequences of both caution and boldness. But this trait connects to something larger that most people never discuss. The 6th trait is becoming almost extinct in our hyper-connected world, the capacity for deep solitude. Remember those Saturdays when every single friend was busy? No plans, no one to call, just you and an entire weekend stretching out ahead. And here is the thing that would confuse modern children. That was fine. That was actually okay. You could spend hours alone in your room, reading, drawing, building elaborate scenarios with action figures, creating entire worlds inside your head. You would take bike rides alone, exploring neighborhoods you had no reason to be in, perfectly content with your own company. This was not loneliness. This was something entirely different. You learned that being alone and being lonely are not the same thing, that you did not need constant external validation to feel secure in who you were. The independence forced on this generation created something that therapists now recognize as essential for mental health: the ability to self-soothe, to be comfortable in your own head, to not need the constant noise of other people to feel okay. These are adults who can spend entire weekends alone and emerge refreshed instead of drained, who do not need to fill every silence with stimulation, who can be with themselves without running from themselves. And this connects directly to the seventh trait, the one that was forged in moments of quiet pain: emotional self-regulation. Something happened at school, someone said something cruel, or you failed a test you studied for, or your best friend suddenly decided they were not your friend anymore. You came home, closed your bedroom door, and lay on your bed staring at the ceiling. You felt everything: the hot tightness in your chest, the sting behind your eyes, the anger and embarrassment and confusion all swirling together. But here is the thing: you could not text anyone about it. You could not scroll through social media looking for distraction. You could not even call your friend because your mom was on the landline and mobile phones did not exist. So you just sat with it. You stared at the ceiling, maybe punched your pillow, maybe cried, and you felt that feeling in its fullness until eventually, slowly, it passed. This was not suppression. This was something far more valuable. You learned that emotions are visitors, not residents, that feelings come in waves and waves eventually recede, that you could experience disappointment without it destroying you. What psychologists now call emotional self-regulation, one of the strongest predictors of success in career and relationships, was simply you learning to sit with pain until it transformed on its own. But now we need to go somewhere uncomfortable, because everything I have described has a shadow, and this is the part that might change how you see all of it. This generation paid a price for their resilience, a price that shows up in therapy offices across the country, in marriages that struggle with intimacy, in adult children who cannot understand why their parents seem so emotionally distant. Here is what happens when you spend your entire childhood learning to handle everything alone. You become almost incapable of asking for help, not because you do not need it, but because needing help feels like failure, like weakness, like evidence that you are not as capable as you trained yourself to be. These are adults who will drive in circles for an hour before stopping to ask directions, who will struggle silently with depression rather than call a friend, who will carry the weight of problems alone until they physically collapse under them. The internal locus of control that served them so well in childhood becomes a prison in adulthood, because here is what nobody taught them. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you cannot do it alone. And there is another shadow, one that shows up in their closest relationships. That emotional self-regulation they mastered, it sometimes crossed a line into something else entirely. Emotional suppression. They learned so well how to sit with feelings until they passed that some of them forgot how to express feelings while they were still present. Partners and children of 1970s adults often describe them the same way. Hard to read, emotionally distant, never quite sure what they are thinking. Not because they do not feel deeply. They feel enormously, but they learned early, through thousands of repetitions, that feelings were meant to be processed privately, not performed, not shared, handled alone in silence until they went away. This is not criticism, it is recognition. Every strength has a cost, and understanding both is how we grow. Now let us talk about something that was wired so deeply into this generation that they do not even recognize it as unusual: the ability to wait. Think about what waiting meant in the 1970s. If you wanted to watch your favorite show, You had to be sitting in front of the television at exactly the right time, on exactly the right day. Miss it? You waited for the summer rerun. Maybe months later, maybe never. Christmas morning was magical specifically because you waited 365 days for it. That bicycle meant everything because you saved for it, coin by coin, for an entire year. Anticipation was not just part of the reward, it was most of the reward. Modern brains are wired for instant everything, immediate answers, instant streaming, same-day delivery, but 1970s brains learned a different pattern entirely. And research shows that people who can delay gratification have lower rates of addiction, higher achievement, and more stable relationships. This generation got that training built into their daily existence without ever knowing it was training at all. And failure taught them something else, something that modern children, wrapped in participation trophies and grade inflation, rarely learn. You fell off your bike with blood running down your legs. Your parents looked at you and said, "You are fine, get back on." So you did. You struck out with the bases loaded. You watched your science fair volcano refuse to erupt. You forgot your lines in the school play, with everyone watching. And each time, you felt the full weight of failure. But here is what did not happen. No committee of adults rushed in to soften the blow. No one told you that trying was just as good as winning. You failed, you felt terrible, and then you figured out what to do differently next time. This is why 1970s adults do not spiral after professional rejection or relationship failure. They have an internal voice that automatically asks, "Okay, what did I learn?" They treat failure as data, not identity, because they learned young that falling down does not define you. Getting back up does. And finally, all of this shaped how they raise their own children, sometimes in ways they do not even realize. Many 1970s kids now stand in their kitchens, watching their children struggle with something, a difficult homework problem, a friendship falling apart, and they feel the instinct rising, the urge to jump in, to fix it, to make the discomfort disappear. But many of them resist, not because they do not care, but because they understand something the helicopter parenting misses entirely. They know that children need to experience manageable struggle to develop genuine confidence, that rescuing your child from every difficulty is not love, it is theft. You are stealing their chance to discover they can handle hard things. When their child fails, they ask, "What do you think you could do differently?" Because that is the question they learn to ask themselves. But here is the final piece, and this might be the most important thing I say in this entire video. If you recognize yourself in what I have described, if you are someone who handles everything alone, who processes every emotion in private, who cannot ask for help even when you are drowning, then maybe it is time to learn what your childhood never taught you. Resilience is not about never needing anyone. It is about knowing when you do. The same nervous system that learned to handle everything alone can learn something new. It can learn that asking for help is not weakness, that sharing your struggles is not failure, that the same hands that taught themselves to catch every fall can also learn to reach out. This generation carries something rare, a quiet confidence forged by freedom, strengthened by boredom, and calibrated by risk. They are proof that resilience comes not from protection, but from trusted exposure to difficulty. But they also carry invisible weight, the inability to lean on others, the habit of processing pain in isolation, the belief buried so deep they barely recognize it, that needing someone means failing. Perhaps the greatest gift this generation can give to themselves and to those who love them is permission to be human, to need, to ask, to let someone else catch them for once. That might be the final lesson the 1970s still has left to teach.